Okay, so get this. Imagine you mess up so badly you're facing, like the death penalty. And then someone steps in and takes your punishment.
Intense.
Right. That's the kind of heavy stuff we're dealing with today as we dive into the ancient Israelite system of sacrifice and atonement. We've got these excerpts from a religious study guide, and it's not just, dry facts and dates.
Right.
We're talking theological interpretations, even a fictional story to help us understand it all.
I think what's so fascinating about this system is how intertwined it is with the Israelites' core beliefs. You see, they believed in a God who was totally holy.
Hold on. When we say holy, we don't just mean really good.
Right. It's much bigger than that.
Yeah.
Think of it as being set apart, different.
Okay.
And that difference, that holiness, it created a huge gap between God and humanity.
So even a small slip-up and you're out of luck.
Vanished. You're getting it. That's the dilemma the Israelites faced. How can imperfect humans exist in the presence of a perfect God? And their answer was the system of sacrifice. And this guide really dives deep into the specifics. We're talking different types of offerings, each with its own ritual and purpose.
It's like a whole menu of sacrifices. You've got your burnt offerings, your sin offerings, guilt offerings. They really had a sacrifice for, every situation, huh?
They did.
What's the deal with all of that?
Well, each offering had a very distinct purpose. It was a way to bridge that gap we were talking about.
Okay.
For example, the burnt offering. That was all about total commitment. The guide emphasizes that everything but the animal's hide was burned up.
Wow.
Talk about going all in.
That is some serious dedication. So what about the other offerings? What were those about?
Well, think of it like this. The sin offering, that addressed unintentional sins. You messed up, you didn't mean to. You're seeking forgiveness. The guilt offering, that was for when you messed up and you need to make things right with someone you wronged.
Okay.
And then there's the fellowship offering. And, well, as the name implies, that was all about celebrating and strengthening the bonds with God.
Okay, so this wasn't just about, appeasing an angry God. There's something more going on here, right?
Yeah.
It's about acknowledging you messed up and trying to reconnect with God.
Exactly. And that's where it gets really interesting. With the concept of substitution, the Israelites believed that the animal was a stand-in, dying in the person's place.
Well, wait, hold on. So they're basically saying this animal takes the punishment for my mistake?
Yes.
That's pretty intense.
It is. And the guide even quotes Leviticus 17:11. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it for you on the altar to make atonement for your souls, for it is the blood that makes atonement by the life. So to them, blood represented life itself. And by offering the animal's blood, they were acknowledging the seriousness of their sin and offering a life in exchange for their own.
It all seems so, visceral.
It is.
And symbolic. Laying hands on the animal, shedding the blood, burning it on the altar.
Yeah.
Do you think, that physicality made it more real, more impactful for them?
Absolutely. These rituals, they weren't just, abstract ideas. They were tangible experiences, and they brought those complex concepts to life.
And speaking of bringing things to life, the guide points out that substitution wasn't some brand new idea. It pops up throughout their history, right?
Oh, yeah.
Adam and Eve covering their shame, Abraham almost sacrificing Isaac, and then there's the Passover lamb.
Exactly.
So they were building on an idea that had been around for generations.
Right.
Are there any patterns you see in how this concept kind of evolved over time?
Well, it's really fascinating. You see a progression from simply covering up a mistake to a more direct life-for-life exchange.
Yeah.
And it really suggests a deepening understanding of what it meant to approach a holy God.
And that progression leads to the structured system laid out in Leviticus.
Exactly.
It's like they took this deep-seated belief and formalized it.
And to really bring this idea to life, the guide includes a story.
Oh, cool.
About a man named Ahira and his family making a sin offering. It's a fictional story, but it gives us a peek into how they might have lived out this belief.
I love that, using stories.
Yeah.
It just makes it so much easier to connect with these ancient practices. What stood out to you in Ahira's story?
It's that moment where Ahira explains to his son what it means to lay hands on the lamb. Rituals, they were so central to their lives.
Yeah.
And by physically placing their hand on the animal, they weren't just observing a custom, but they were making that idea of substitution real.
Tangible.
tangible. Exactly.
I can see how powerful that would be, especially for a kid trying to wrap their head around this.
Absolutely. And there's another really fascinating aspect of the Israelite system that really stands out, and that's the emphasis on accessibility.
Okay.
God wanted everyone to have a path to forgiveness, regardless of their wealth.
Okay, that is interesting. So it wasn't just for the elite.
Yeah.
The people who could, afford the big, most impressive sacrifices.
Not at all.
Yeah.
If you couldn't afford a bull or a sheep, you could offer doves or pigeons. It's like God was saying, it's not about the price tag, it's about the heart.
That's surprisingly progressive. It really challenges the idea that religious practice was just for the wealthy.
Absolutely. And it really underscores that idea that God's holiness is something everyone needs to address,
Yeah.
no matter what your social standing is. We all need forgiveness. We all need atonement.
So we've got this system rooted in substitution, accessible to everyone, and steeped in symbolism and ritual. What does it all mean for us today? Where do we even begin to unpack this? I'm really starting to see why this system was so important to the Israelites. It wasn't just about checking off boxes on a list.
No, not at all.
Was it?
It was about understanding their relationship with God,
Yeah.
finding their place in this grand scheme of things. It was all about connecting with the divine.
And as we talked about in part 1, that idea of substitution, that played a huge role in that process.
Right.
The animal taking the punishment for the person, it really showed how seriously they took messing up.
It does. It drives home the point that there were real consequences for their actions. But it also shows, just how far God was willing to go to mend that connection.
But I still have some questions about, the details. How did this system actually work in practice? What did atonement, feel like for the Israelites?
That's a great question. And luckily, this study guide really digs into the practical and emotional side of things. It's not just about the rituals themselves, but about the inner transformation they were meant to bring about.
Okay, so let's unpack that. What did atonement actually mean for them? Was it just about saying sorry and moving on?
Well, the Hebrew word for atonement is kafar, and it literally means to cover.
So it's like the sacrifice was covering up their sin.
In a way, yes, but it's deeper than that. It's about removing the barrier that sin created between them and God. Think of it like this. They believed that sin messed up the natural harmony of their relationship with God, and atonement was about restoring that balance.
So they weren't just trying to, hide it. They were actually trying to fix the damage.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Sure.
But I can't help but wonder, did everyone experience atonement on an individual level, or was it more of a communal thing?
It was both.
Okay.
While individuals certainly sought atonement for their own actions, the guide also talks about this idea of communal atonement, especially on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement.
Ah, Yom Kippur. That's a big one, right?
Yeah.
I know it's a day of fasting and repentance, but what's the connection to the sacrifice?
Yom Kippur was the most important day in the Israelite calendar. It was a time for the entire community to acknowledge, their collective shortcomings and seek forgiveness. The high priest would enter the Holy of Holies, the most sacred part of the temple, and offer a sacrifice for the sins of the entire nation.
Wow. I bet that was intense. Imagine carrying the weight of a whole nation's sins on your shoulders.
It was a reminder that even the most devout among them were still capable of messing up. Yom Kippur wasn't just about individual piety. It was about recognizing that interconnectedness of the community.
Yeah.
And the shared responsibility for maintaining their relationship with God.
So it's like this collective act of saying, we messed up, but we're committed to doing better.
Exactly. And again, this wasn't about appeasing an angry God.
Right.
It was about restoring a sense of balance and harmony. They believed that sin disrupted the natural order, and atonement, both individual and communal, was about righting those wrongs.
This whole system is so much more nuanced than I realized. It's not just about sacrificing animals to make God happy. It's about acknowledging your mistakes, taking responsibility, and working to restore that connection, both individually and as a community.
Yeah, you're getting it. It's about understanding the impact of our actions on ourselves, our community, and ultimately our relationship with the divine.
But I still have one nagging question. If the animal sacrifice was so central to all of this, why would God allow substitutes for those who couldn't afford it? Wouldn't that, undermine the whole system?
But that's where we see the compassion and the accessibility of the system shine through.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, the guide emphasized that God wanted everyone to have access to forgiveness,
Right.
not just those who could afford, lavish offerings.
Right, offering doves and pigeons as a substitute. It's almost like a safety net built in.
Exactly. It was less about the monetary value of the sacrifice and more about the sincerity of the heart behind it.
It makes me think of that verse from Micah. He has shown you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God.
Beautifully put.
Yeah.
It's not about the empty rituals or flashy displays.
Right.
It's about genuine repentance and a willingness to change.
Yay.
The outer act of sacrifice was meant to reflect an inner transformation.
So the sacrifice was a way to express that interchange, to make it real.
And in doing so, to experience the real and tangible forgiveness of God.
Yeah.
To feel that weight lifted, to know that you are back in right relationship.
This is really making me think about the nature of forgiveness.
Yeah.
And what it means to make things right when we mess up. It's not just about saying the words, but about taking action, making amends, and trying to do better.
Exactly. And it's so fascinating that these ancient ideas, they still resonate today.
Yeah.
Even though we don't practice animal sacrifice anymore.
Right.
The core principles are still relevant. We still grapple with guilt. We still seek forgiveness. And we still long for that sense of wholeness and reconciliation.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to the depth and complexity of this ancient system.
Yeah.
It's not just about rules and rituals. It's about understanding the human condition.
Yeah.
Our capacity for both good and bad.
Absolutely.
And our desire to connect with something greater than ourselves. So we've spent the last two parts really digging into this ancient Israelite system of sacrifice and atonement. It's been a wild ride, for sure, from the specifics of all the different offerings to that really profound meaning behind the idea of substitution.
Right. We've seen how their belief in a holy God, totally set apart from humanity, really shaped how they approached worship and forgiveness.
Yeah.
They believed that sin created this chasm between them and God.
Right.
And these sacrifices were a way to bridge that gap.
And that idea of an animal standing in for a person, taking the punishment for their mistakes.
Yep.
That's really stuck with me. It shows how seriously they took making things right with God.
It is a powerful image.
Yeah.
But as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's important to ask ourselves, what does all of this mean for us today?
Yeah.
We live in a very different world now.
Totally.
One where animal sacrifice is pretty much unheard of.
Right. It's easy to see this as, something from the past. Something totally foreign to our modern way of thinking. But you're saying there's more to it, that these ancient ideas still have something to teach us.
Absolutely. While that outward form of sacrifice might have changed, those underlying principles, those are still very much alive.
Okay.
The need for atonement, recognizing our own imperfections,
Yeah.
The desire to connect with something greater than ourselves. These are universal human experiences that transcend time and culture.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more. How do these ancient ideas connect to our modern world?
Well, think about it this way. We still feel guilt when we mess up. We still yearn for forgiveness, whether it's, from others or from ourselves.
Right.
And a lot of us, regardless of our, religious beliefs, we still seek a sense of purpose and meaning,
Right.
a connection to something bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
These are all echoes of those same needs and desires that fueled the Israelite system of sacrifice and atonement.
So even though we don't offer animals on an altar anymore, that core human experience hasn't changed all that much?
No.
We're still wrestling with those same questions,
Yeah.
of right and wrong, how to make amends when we mess up.
Precisely. And the idea of substitution, while maybe not as literal as it was for the Israelites,
Right.
it still resonates in a lot of belief systems. Think about the concept of, a savior figure.
Okay.
Someone who takes on the burden of humanity's sins and offers a path to redemption.
You're talking about Jesus. How he's seen as the ultimate sacrifice in Christian theology. It's really amazing how the language and the imagery of that Israelite system, it carries over into Christianity.
It does.
And how these ancient ideas continue to shape our understanding of forgiveness and salvation.
It's a powerful example of the enduring legacy of these ancient beliefs. But it's not just in religion that we see these themes play out. Think about secular concepts like restorative justice,
Oh, okay.
where the focus is on repairing the harm and finding ways for victims and offenders to move forward.
That's a great point. It's not about punishment,
Right.
or retribution,
Exactly.
but about taking responsibility, making amends, and finding a way to heal the wounds that are caused by wrongdoing. It's like a modern day version of atonement almost.
It is, and it highlights how those principles of atonement and substitution, they can be applied in all sorts of contexts,
Yeah.
religious and secular.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing our shared humanity
Yeah.
and that possibility of redemption, even when we make mistakes.
This has been such an incredible journey. I came into this deep dive thinking we would be talking about like ancient rituals
Yeah.
and dusty old texts. But what we've uncovered is something much deeper,
Yes.
something that speaks to the core of what it means to be human.
We've seen how the Israelites grappled with guilt, with forgiveness,
Yeah.
and that desire for reconciliation with God.
Yeah.
And in doing so, they've given us this framework for understanding those same struggles in our own lives.
It really has. This deep dive has really opened my eyes to the enduring power of these ancient beliefs. It makes me realize that even though the world has changed, our basic human needs and desires, those haven't changed.
No.
We still long for connection, for wholeness, for forgiveness.
But ultimately, that's what this all comes down to,
Yeah.
the search for meaning,
Yeah.
for purpose, for a way to make things right when we've gone astray. It's a journey we all share, whether we realize it or not.
Absolutely. So, as we wrap things up, I want to leave you with this. We've explored how the Israelites sought atonement, but what does that look like for you today? What does it mean to truly forgive yourself and others? What rituals or practices or beliefs help you make amends and move forward when you've messed up? That's something we're thinking about as we continue on our own journeys. Thanks for diving deep with us. Until next time, keep exploring.